One of the things I like about Acts 23, which is our chapter for today, is that we find out a little bit more about Paul and who he is as a person. So, from the very first verse, Paul looked at the council members boldly and said, "My brothers, I stand before you with a clear conscience to this day that I have lived to fulfill God's will." Well, this so upsets Ananias, the high priest, that he orders those near Paul to strike him on the mouth. And then Paul retorts, "God will strike you. You are like a whitewashed wall. You sit there to judge me according to the law, yet you yourself break the law by commanding me to be struck." Those standing near Paul said, "How dare you insult God's most high priest?" And Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not know he was the high priest, for it is written, 'You are not to speak badly about the ruler of your people.'" It's a little clip of Paul and perhaps his frustration of the way he's being treated. Here he is being judged by the law, and the law itself is being broken. He's perhaps more prophetic in what he says to Ananias than he knows. Well, almost certainly he was, because Ananias later in his life after this would in fact be killed by his own people because he was known for his viciousness and angry temper. If you read your Bible commentaries, you'll probably read a little bit of discussion a bit about what Paul does here as well. I mean, what's going on when Paul says, "I didn't know he was the high priest"? Some have speculated that it was his poor eyesight and he just failed to see him clearly. Though the way Luke writes about Paul, it seems almost certain that if that was the case, Luke would have pointed that out clearly. But it could be true. Another variation is that he just did not know the high priest. He'd been away from Jerusalem for a long time, and he didn't have a smartphone. He didn't have a sat phone either. And perhaps at other times somebody else had sat in the high priest's place, so he just didn't realise who he was talking to. And another variation is that he was using irony. That because a true high priest, a high priest of character, obeying the law, you see, would not have given such an order. So when Paul says, "I did not know he was the high priest," he's effectively saying, well, he doesn't act like one. That's probably my favourite. For me, just a little bit of the Paul personality comes out there. But which is the correct one? We don't know. We just don't know. Now, Paul at this point realizes that in this council, you've got two main Jewish groups. You've got the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And we find a little bit more out about Paul, actually, because he says, "I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee." We find out that his father in that short phrase, his father was also a Pharisee, one of the holy, set apart, very concerned to follow the ways of God, people of God. And the Pharisees believe in the resurrection of the dead and the hope of that, whereas the Sadducees very much didn't. And Paul sort of uses that to cause the council to argue together. It kind of works in that moment, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And of course it gets delayed. There's such a sharp division. So the Roman commander that's organised all this, orders guards to go in, rescue him and take him back to the barracks. They're fearing for Paul's life because for a Roman commander to allow a Roman citizen to be killed under his watch, as it were, especially by the Jewish people, would have not gone well for that commander. And it says just in verse 11, just another one of those little snapshots. On the following day, Paul saw the Lord standing by him. And Jesus says to him, "Take courage. As you have testified faithfully about me in Jerusalem, it will be necessary for you to testify also in Rome." That personal strengthening that the Lord gives him. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus himself mentions these two key places at this time, Jerusalem and Rome. And I think here you've got like the spiritual capital of the world, the place of faith, and Rome is the secular, economic, political force of might capital of the world. And you've got in this one sentence that bringing together, and that Jesus didn't die just for a bunch of spiritual people. Jesus came for everyone. And therefore, it's on us, isn't it, as the church, to continue to communicate that gospel into the world of Rome and not just keep ourselves in religious little bubbles. So every aspect of heaven is to be brought into Jerusalem and Rome, from Rome to Jerusalem. And we could say from the spiritual to the secular. But that mindset really is one that humankind is placed on it. I don't think God has that mindset. Jesus, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. It's everything. It's the world may have been corrupted. The world may be dark, but inherently it was still God's creation, and it still is God's creation, despite what sin does in it in terms of the disruption and the despair that it brings, the darkness that there is. So from Jerusalem, we've got the place of praise and worship, of experience of God. And in Rome, you've perhaps got the place of work or even the home. But the thing is, Jesus is bringing them together here. And this is important because and I think it's something that God has done in Church Reset. In fact, I even had this conversation with somebody in the hub at the summit today, that in this time, what God has done has reminded us that the spiritual parts of our lives are definitely not just the gathering and the worship and the guitars and the lights or the organ, but the spiritual of our lives is in everything. And the secular of our lives is in everything. And there is an importance in that gathering and of the good experience of encounter. But also we need to be in Rome as well. And Rome is often a place like it is for Paul right now. I mean, Paul's a deeply spiritual man. We can't deny that. But the world could also be this place of hardship, of sacrifice, of moving forward against that opposition. It can even be a place of imprisonment like Paul. So when we uphold the gathering, and we must do, please don't hear me wrong, that gathering, that corporate God encounter is essential and vital, and we will be back at that. But the emphasis of the times we are in is to make sure that our lives are not just seeking sort of that good experience. It's good to have the positive experience, but we live in a consumer world, you see. We live in a world of consumerism. And what can happen when we have great worship and great music is we can become consumers of that as a product. It can be that that's what Christianity is about. But disciples of Jesus are not supposed to spend their lives gathering in a worship hall with great worship. We are to be on the road, on the journey with Jesus, in the workplace, in the supermarkets, in the universities, in the college, in the schools, in our families. And discipleship is what enables us to go through hard times. Christianity is not a form of consumerism. It's not just there to please us. It's about living real life in the real world and making a positive difference. It's about knowing Jesus. It's about helping to bring about social justice. Because God has not divided the world into Jerusalem and Rome as humankind has been. And so I just think that's interesting that in this passage you've got the Lord standing by Paul saying, take courage. This is about Jerusalem and Rome. And he reminds Paul of that's where he's going. And the rest of the chapter continues Paul's journey, but we just find out a little bit more really of Paul, though frustratingly small, I feel. Because this journey to Rome now involves his family, who we've never heard of before. We never hear them mentioned again. But his family, his sister, or at least his sister's son, Paul's nephew, hears, whether it's his sister that hears or the boy himself hears, because it's likely that he's a boy from the translation. The Aramaic of this passage, he is a preteen boy. And the literal translation of when the centurion talks to the young man the commander, and the centurion takes the boy who's told Paul about the plot to murder him. When the centurion takes him to him, the commander, it says, takes the young man or takes the boy by the hand, is the literal translation. So he probably is 10, 11, 12, but we don't really know. But Paul's nephew, his family, his sister, we don't know anything about them. But one thing they value as Jewish people is that life is precious. And if Paul, no matter whether they get on really well with him or whether they don't, Paul's life is precious. And this boy must have been a courageous lad, goes to see Paul, and Paul sends him to the commander. It wouldn't have been unusual for Paul to have visitors as a Roman citizen. In fact, often that's how you would live. You would be supported still by your friends and family who would bring you food. So that's not unusual. But the son goes to the commander. Sorry, not the son. The nephew goes to the commander and tells him there's actually a plot to kill Paul. And so the next chapter in Paul's journey happens quickly, because the commander arranges for an armed guard to take Paul to the next place where he will come before the governor of that region, whose name is Felix. And we'll look at that in the next one. All right, God bless you. Stay safe. If you're liking these videos and would like us to continue making them, please don't forget to click the subscribe button and tick the bell to get notifications. Thank you so much.